All right, here on In the Circle on D1 Softball, Eric Lopez here with you, and this is episode number 911 in the history of the show. And someone has become a regular every year. This is the one of the most talked about, asked about episodes that we do every year when we talk season preview. People ask, when is she coming on? Is she coming on? Yes. Since 2019, she's been on every year. We've done this now. Amanda Scarborough, our season preview show. Talk about it. That's it. You're the veteran now. I feel like you're like a de facto co-host for this episode every year we do this.
I'm into it. No matter how busy I am, Eric, I really look forward to it. And okay, episode 911. So my phone number when I was growing up was 680-9114. And I always got so nervous when I was little to dial it to call my parents. So I'd go really quickly over 911 and I'd go to the four like
Oh,
so quick
wow.
because I was just so scared that it was going to dial 911. And you're told as a young kid, like, don't dial
Right, right,
911
right,
unless
right.
it's an emergency. So 680 and it'd be like 9114, like go really, really fast through it. So cool. I like episode 911. Let's do it. This is an emergency episode. Let's go.
It's especially that's a good way to describe it. I can't believe they gave phone numbers with 911 as the wow, that is risky.
I know. I always thought that too when I was little, but
Because if you
yeah.
hesitate, like you're going straight to the like I don't.
But are you? Because you dialed numbers before it. I don't know. But that was just my like 9-year-old way of looking at it when, your parents tell you
That's true.
911 is an important three numbers. And so then it's in my phone number. I'm like, oh my goodness, I got to dial quickly through this.
You're very, very efficient. You got to be just like we will be on this episode. We're going to talk a lot about the Power Four conference, some of the storylines in college softball, and let's just get into that because there are so many interesting storylines this year. A lot of youth in the sport and talking to coaches. You've been super busy, by the way, for folks that have been wondering. You've been obviously just did the draft with Athletes Unlimited. You've been doing your pitching angel, which keeps growing and growing every year. I think how are you feeling? I think that's the first question. I should be very nice and just ask you how you're doing because you have been super busy with a lot of great stuff like the Athletes Unlimited draft, one of the most hyped up drafts that I can remember. I mean, when Jeff Passan is breaking Athletes Unlimited stories, it's kind of a big deal.
Okay, the draft was incredible, I thought, and historical. Like I truly, truly believe that was just what 4 or 5 nights ago. And I thought it went amazing. I thought it was so well done. The studio was like bigger. You know how some things might be smaller in person than it looks? I think that the studio was actually bigger in person than it looks. Like it was massive and so well done. All the people involved in it, from the behind the scenes people to all the who's who of softball with Stacey Newman and Kat and Lisa Fernandez and Jenny Dalton Hill. And I mean, you could name, the list goes on and on and on, and probably more names to be added. So honored to be a part of that. I thought it was such a special night. I thought it was really well done and very exciting for a sport. I'm pumped.
Is there a part of you that wished you were a GM there, or are you glad you're not in that side? You just rather analyze it.
I think I was relieved that I wasn't 2.5 minutes on the clock having to make these big decisions and hard decisions. I mean, there were over 80 players that were in the players pool and only 48 were going to get drafted. So you knew some people were going to get, left out. And there's so much talent in the talent pool. And I think it speaks volumes of where AUSL is headed, who wants to be involved, why they want to be involved, because Athletes Unlimited just does things the right way. So they don't cut corners with anything. I mean, unprecedented investment. So I'm just really looking forward to it. But I was happy to be an analyst and not a GM or even a head coach. Like I like the position that I get to be in at all these different levels in our sport. I just love it to death. It's a dream come true.
Yeah, it's great for them. It should be exciting to see them in that team format. Once that gets going later on this year, that's going to be exciting. Of course, a lot of those GMs and coaches will be focusing on the college season. They'll do the college draft later on. And I'm curious. You obviously, as I mentioned, you're doing pitching angel. That's bigger and bigger. I feel like you're just grows by the week, the day. Like you did a big event in Dallas recently. I mean, among other things. I am curious of all the interaction you get. How much interaction have you gotten about, for example, NiJaree Canady and the headline that she made this summer by transferring to Texas Tech and the huge NIL? And I just spoke to her on the podcast. She wants to grow the game, grow more interest, be more open about, which I really appreciate. I'm curious, how much interaction do you get with some of the young people you get to teach and they get lessons from about things like NiJaree moving on, like Jordy Ball coming back from a serious injury as a pitcher.
Yeah, I think with the youth softball, like you're just so focused a lot of times on what you're doing and your journey and your lesson and your drill that you have to do that they get just so wound up in what they're doing. So it's, I mean, we definitely like, I'll get messages and emails and people will ask about it. But I feel like at like my pitching event, they're just so focused on what they're doing. They're not even thinking about anything that's happening on the outside. But I love like the Twitter engagement, the response on social media, people talking about it, like NiJaree was just saying to you. I mean, that attention, that engagement creates a buzz around the sport that her deal created, her move, that transfer, her World Series that she had. I mean, that line of events that happened, what, over the course of a couple of months, like really got a lot of attention in her sport. And I think that's just ultimately what it's all about. And it seems like that's what she wants as well. And she gets a lot of attention. She's a huge leader and role model in our sport. And rightfully so, with the past few years that she's had and the numbers that she's put up and how electric she is to watch. I mean, she's a huge reason that you want to watch her sport. I'm excited that we get her for another 2 years.
And I was really impressed. She's very open. She was open when she came out with her decision in July, why she did the decision, reference women's basketball and the growth there and the other women's sports, and she wants to help part of that. And I kind of respect and appreciate the fact that she's open with it because I think it's our sport. We both love the sport very much, but I think we both know sometimes the sport likes to keep it under wraps, keep it in a bubble, but it's hard to grow the sport if you want a kid constantly stay in a bubble there and kind of closed to a lot of people at casuals there.
Yeah. Yeah. I think that the more open, the better. And it's hard for coaches because they're getting pulled in a lot of different directions. And ultimately, they're competitors. They want to win. They don't want to give away all their secrets and maybe, like injury type related stuff. Like there's a lot that coaches keep secret, but there's a lot that we know too because of synergy and all the statistics. And like we know more about our sport without coaches having to outright tell us than we ever have before when we're calling games and studying the sport. But there's also this little block sometimes with coaches where you just want to be able to learn more from them, where you want to know more about their teams and how they do things and the why. And like, you just want to be along for the ride. And so for NiJaree to want to be open and honest about that stuff, I feel like being open and honest is the best way to grow. When you are a little bit more hidden and reserved, I feel like that's when, people start to assume things or then different narratives start to get started because people just make up stuff. But if you're open and honest and straightforward with everything that you're doing, then there's nothing to make up. You know the answers already. You're not going to make up anything. You know what's going on. So I'm all for that openness in our sport. The more, the better. And we're finding out a lot about these teams because of all the data and video and games on TV. I mean, we know more about them than ever before. And so, but more openness from the coaches never hurts anybody either. I'd take it. I'd be open for that.
Exactly. How much do you talk about to your people that come to Pitching Angel, about openness and analytics and stuff? Like I had Sydney Burzon from LSU who studies analytics to a T. She has all her videos on her phone and studies her mechanics, studies all the analytics, and that's how she helps prepare. How much is that discussed with the youngsters? Is that too young for them, or are they already into this?
I think different coaches can take a different approach. And to me, I want a girl at a young age, right? Like I'm dealing mostly with say 9 to 14, 15-year-old pitchers. So I want them to enjoy pitching. Like I want them to just learn how to love it, how to grow in it and enjoy it because it's so hard. There's so many ups and downs as a young pitcher. My bottom line, even why I do this and have my brand and company of Pitching Angel, I just want pitchers to pitch as long as possible. So I think I try to keep things simple, clear, and easy. That's always my goal. So for them, I'm not going to talk as much about data because I don't want to overwhelm them. And a lot of them have looking at me like I have four eyes, like they just get so confused by it. I mean, they're just trying to figure out their glove hand and their mechanics. So at that age, I don't want to overwhelm them. with too much information, where I really feel like when they turn the corner and become more advanced, that to me is when that data starts to play a bigger part and definitely is implemented now at younger ages, like in high school and maybe even seventh and eighth grade, to a point where, when I was growing up, that wasn't even a thing, but they're familiar with it when they get to college now versus learning it only when they get to college. And when they get there, there's so much more to learn and explore because these college coaches have all these different positions to go through the numbers and scouting their own selves and the other team and coming up with a plan weekend to weekend, which is just so much of the behind the scenes that the average fan doesn't even know about, how they're using these numbers, digging through it, formulating a plan for each individual pitcher because they all have their own strengths, and knowing, these hitters that they're going up against would be better for this pitcher. These other hitters over here would be better for this pitcher to go up against. So we're constantly learning as analysts as the game is evolving so much, but at like the younger ages, not so much. I'm going into the details of that. Like, let's talk strike percentage and throwing strikes, period. But the data, the intense data, high school and college, I mean, it's just growing like crazy.
So high school, we're talking high school level at that point where we start getting into the weeds of the analytics.
Yeah, at least analytics that about your own stuff, right? Like, you're not going to know. I feel like in college, like, you're going to learn a lot more about what the other team is doing. And that's where it kind of levels up, I think, for the data that they're going to sort through. And high school, you're not going to have as much information on the other teams, but you can have a lot of information about your own self, of pitch spin and movement and pitch shape. And as a hitter, you might not have as much information about the other pitcher that you're facing, right? Some, but not like it is when you get to college and everybody has to show their cards on synergy and all the pitches are tagged and put in, from the speed to the pitch location to the counts. I mean, the amount of data is endless, you guys who are listening to this, that these coaches have access to now that we did not have even 4 years ago. Like, I mean, this is like a newer thing that is happening to where they know what they know, all kinds of things about the other team. So in high school, you probably just know more about what you can do and your numbers and your strengths. But I feel like when you get to college, you're not only looking at your strengths and weaknesses, but the other team's strengths and weaknesses, which helps formulate a plan for these coaches to figure out a way to win.
What would you? How if this was around when you played? Like, you would have enjoyed all this. Would you have? I mean, you would have been deep in on this, wouldn't you?
Yeah, well, you know me at this point that I am a big like overthinker and I'm very cerebral. So coming at it from the standpoint of being both a pitcher and hitter, I would have had to have come up with a plan for it not to be too much, because you do grow up too with like just focusing so much on yourself, right? And so it's just a different way of thinking. I don't want that to be selfish, like, oh, Amanda's a bad teammate because she's focusing on herself. No, trying to be your best version of yourself for your team, right? Like focusing on what you can do. And so, like, to hear all these numbers, and I would have, I think I would have liked it. Like, I would like to think of myself as a player that would have been able to take that in and run with it to make me better. But at the same time, I know myself very well. And I would just maybe stir about those numbers, like take it to a level that's unhealthy. And that is what these players are dealing with and these coaches are dealing with, because every single one of their players takes in this information differently. So if they have a roster of 20 to 25 players on their team, each one of those players is so unique for what they want to know and how they need to communicate to them and how they're taking in the information, how they're practicing that information, how they're going to the game with that information. So that's another thing that these coaches are handling, is just how to take on all of this data and apply it to each person on their team and their team as a whole.
Would you have been able to be a two-way player, or would you feel like you would have had to give up one because of all that information there?
No, I think I would have been able to still do it. I would have been really stubborn, and figured out a way. Because, I mean, there's the whole school aspect too, Eric. Like, I was a good student. I was an academic All-American as well as an All-American on the field. Like, school for a lot of these players is important. You're taught academics is important in high school to get recruited, and that never really leaves you when you get to college if that is a priority for you. So you're not only balancing all that data numbers in softball, but also, your job to be a real student too, and just balance it all.
So you're the perfect person to ask this. What advice would you give someone like NiJaree Canady, who I talked to her and Jerry Glasgow? She wants to be a full-time two-way player. She's working on her hitting. What's one of the other reasons when she went to Texas Tech, they got kind of lost in the shuffle. She wanted to work with Jerry Glasgow in the hitting style. She has power. That it's a work in progress. I talked to Rhonda Revelle in Nebraska back in the fall. Jordy Ball's going to want to be a two-way player. So they want, great base runner in offense. There's a kind of a managing that you have to do as a head coach because that's your best arm. You don't want, you got to be careful from a health standpoint. But what advice would you give someone like NiJaree or even Jordy Ball, who didn't get to be a two-way player that much at Oklahoma? What advice would you give them as they want to be a two-way player here moving forward?
Yeah, I could go a lot of different directions with this, but two things come to mind. One, time management. Like you're going to have to be the player that comes early, stays late, is putting in extra reps either in the bullpen or in the cages. And I mean, not to mention, you want to be great on defense too. So you have to practice that as well. So, and then studying the teams and looking at film and stuff. I mean, there's a lot to watch. So I think time management is huge. Like being able to absolutely maximize every hour of your day from being a human and having like a little bit of a social life, or at least maybe having that, turning that into a break, to your school, to hitting, to defense, to pitching. Like time management is just utmost important. And then to be able to separate both. Like you can't be a player that when one's going well, the other one's going well. And when one's going bad, the other one's going bad. Like they each individually need to live in their own ecosystem to where they're not affecting each other. And that can be a for better or for worse type thing. Cause I do feel like if it's for better, it's likely for worse too. And you don't want to ride that roller coaster of ups and downs on both. So being able to compartmentalize and separate your results and how you're feeling and how you're doing as a hitter versus how you are as a pitcher, like really being able to create that split in your mind to be able to focus on each one individually.
Do you recommend your young people, like if they asked you, hey, should I do a two-way? Because I've seen a lot of variants. I've seen people like, yes, you should go two-way. I feed off of that. It makes me a better all-around player, stays in the game. There's some like, no, I'm just going to focus on one aspect of the game. What advice do you give the young people if they ask you?
I would say to hit, if you are a pitcher, to hit for as long as possible and as long as you think you have a chance. And I think that you need coaches who are realistic with you about earning opportunities and your place in the offensive lineup. But to do it for as long as you possibly can, because those players are so valuable. And going back to the AUSL draft, I mean, utility was the theme. They an AUSL, they only are going to have 16 position or 16 spots on each roster. That is not big at all. These college teams are having like 25 people on their team. So not only does that affect the game and game management, it affects how they practice, right? Like now these college teams with 25 people on their team can scrimmage against each other because they have bigger roster sizes and can even form like almost three teams if they wanted, right? But with AUSL, the players who were in most demand were the utility players, and we're not just talking pitchers who can hit here. Of course, they're ultimately the highest value, like a Alicia Ocasio, like a Rachel Garcia, maybe Odyssey Alexander hits a little bit too, like that. But like a utility player, like a Hannah Flippin can play any position in the infield. Sydney Romero can play any position on the infield. So being able to play multiple positions just holds you at such a higher value. And if you're a player looking to get recruited, I mean, a pitcher who can hit for herself and add offensive value to a lineup is a huge get. And truly, that's why we call them unicorns, when we're calling games, because they are a special position to be able to do both and do it well.
We're speaking with Amanda Scarborough here on In the Circle on D1 Softball. So let's kind of touch on NiJaree now. Their season tickets are sold out at Lubbock at Texas Tech. They're out. They're adding seats in the bleachers, so it has made a big impact. There's high expectations. All eyes are going to be on her as early as this weekend in Clearwater, where she'll make her debut at Texas Tech. Her game against Jordy Ball is going to potentially with Nebraska is going to be a lot of hoopla there throughout. How do you for her? What is the key for her to block all that out? How can you block that out as a player with all that excitement in blue and just be yourself? Is that going to be something you're looking forward very closely to see how she handles that?
Yeah, because she had this pressure last year, but when you're playing at Stanford versus playing in, I would say, the state of Texas, not necessarily just playing at Texas Tech, right? Like playing in the state of Texas, like the awareness of the sport is just different. Stanford, she was a huge piece of their athletic program there, of course, but like they're just so far away. They're on the West Coast. Like West Coast gets distracted by all their good weather and all their other sports and hobbies that they get to do all the time. In Texas, and in the middle of the country in the Southeast, it is all sports all the time, like all eyes on you. And plus, with the NIL deal that she had, there's another layer of expectation, her coming off of National Player of the Year, another layer of expectation and results. So, I mean, I think that I hadn't thought about it until right now in this moment, to be completely honest with you, Eric. But there is, it's going to be something to watch for her, for how she's able to handle it. Now, her when you talk to her, she's so level headed, she's so intelligent and smart and savvy. You wouldn't think that it would get to a player like her, but she's also just human. And with all the expectations and attention surrounding her, I mean, I feel like it's just normal for it to get to anybody. But at the end of the day, she probably is just saying, I have some of the best stuff in the country, if not the best stuff in the country. I'm just going to go out and do my thing and let the cards fall and show these people, give them a show. Like that's how I'd be looking at it. Like not, oh, there's pressure and expectations, but I get to show everybody how good I am, like in a humble way, right? Like she's been working for this, she's earned all of this attention. Now she can just go out and do what she's been doing for the past 2 years. And I'm sure gotten stronger and gotten even better, because that's just what you do when you're 20, 21 years old. You should be getting better every year. And it's just going to be her managing the expectations along the way. And I think that she can do it.
Yeah, I think, it was interesting. I talked to folks at Texas Tech. As you would imagine, she's gotten so much media requests across from different avenues beyond softball, that they've had to make sure to control some of that, because at the end of
Yeah.
the day, she's still going to school there. She's getting ready for a season. And I got the sense when I talked to her, she's just excited to be A, talking softball, and B, just ready to play and like her, and getting to know her teammates. And I think that's my other question to you now. Like, on the field, there's only 3 returners on that Texas Tech roster. Jerry Glasgow, of course, the new head coach coming over from Louisiana. There's 9 transfers, 9 freshmen. And Jerry admitted to me on the pod, there's a period, they still got to like see how the pieces fit. Like there's that bonding there. What's your thoughts on the Red Raiders here, as far as in the Big 12, in the big picture here, the national landscape? Because I know Nija's his thing is like, I still want to win a national title.
Yeah, I mean, the other transfers that they got that came in, several followed Jerry, and really it seems like the best players from Louisiana last year followed him to Texas Tech. So I feel like they're going to start out strong, and don't discount the fact too that NiJaree Canady is going to have some pitching help behind her. I know that Jerry is excited about a few freshman pitchers that he has, as well as Chloe Riasetto, who, remember, Chloe Riasetto is the little lefty that beat Oklahoma and snapped like their 73-game win streak. She went toe to toe with them in Norman and beat them in 8 innings. So she worked my pitching event, the Pitching Angel Experience. I love her, and she's so different than NiJaree. Lefty, spinning, not going to throw as hard. So I feel like they're going to complement each other well. And Chloe Riasetto has that good experience back behind NiJaree. When, let's face it, last year at Stanford, it was all NiJaree all the time. And she still put up those numbers in a National Player of the Year. So now she's going to have some help. So in talking about expectations and what can we expect from NiJaree, we can maybe expect for her to have some, deeper help behind her that should take a little bit of pressure off of her, as well as a better offense, something else that Stanford did not have last year.
And I think that'll be interesting to how she deals with that and the adjustments. Maya Davis certainly will lead that offense there, and how do they kind of fit? Do you see them challenging Oklahoma State? Oklahoma State returns a lot back offensively, in particular their infield, Carly Godwin. They've added Megan Delgadillo from Fullerton. The big question is the pitching. They've added Ruby Malin coming over from Washington, as well as Crandall from Baylor after, of course, Lexi Kilfoyle's graduation. What's your thoughts on the Big 12 outlook with Gajewski and Oklahoma State the favorites? Arizona in the Big 12, as bizarre as it sounds, we got to get used to that. Arizona's in the mix there in the Big 12, along with Utah and Arizona State. It's an interesting year in the Big 12.
Yeah, it's very interesting. And we had some really great rivalries in the Big 12 with Oklahoma State OU, obviously. And then Oklahoma State Texas had become this rivalry within the Big 12 too. So now, I guess it's going to be Oklahoma State, Texas Tech. Like I'm into that. Like two programs that are in the middle of the country that and oftentimes in the past have maybe gotten a little bit forgotten about that are going to rise up and really challenge each other. I mean, Oklahoma State lost a lot of seniors as well. I mean, they're one of a ton of college programs that lost a lot of seniors, but Kenny Gajewski and the way that he brings in transfers, and he doesn't just, you know, bring in just some people to fill some holes and make his roster deeper. He brings in the biggest impact transfers. Somehow he gets them all. So getting Ruby Malin, getting Riley Crandall, getting that catcher Amanda Hassler from North Carolina State, huge. Megan Delgadillo, is that how you say? Yeah, Delgadillo. I mean, these are like big named people that will come in and start right away. They have experience, they are proven. So I don't know. It's just very impressive how Kenny is able to do that year in and year out. And yeah, I think that Arizona will pose a little bit of a threat. I think for Arizona, poor things last year. I mean, their injuries in the circle were just what hurt them time and time again. So they're going to be healthier. Devin Nets will be back, as well as a deeper pitching staff. I think they have 7 or 8 pitchers on their pitching staff and several big named, key defenders and hitters on their team. Reagan Shockey, Dakota Kennedy. Like, I think that they could serve a threat. But to me, like looking at the Big 12, it's going to be between Oklahoma State and Texas Tech. And that series is going to have huge implications when they go up against each other.
And they opened in Big 12 play. Welcome to the Big 12. They're going to open in Lubbock, Texas. Holy macro. That's a heck of a series there. Arizona, I like a lot as a sleeper for the World Series. I mean, I think that's interesting. But you're right. The youth is going to be key because Utah's young. They lost all their pitching. They're very young in the circle. UCF graduated 11 seniors. You're going to see them in Clearwater call their game against Florida State on that Sunday night primetime game. They got a lot of youth there for Coach Ball Malone and company. Talented, but youth. How quickly they grow up will be a theme throughout the country there. Now, of course, the Big 12 does not have, but that's going to be interesting, right? The theme of the youth.
Yeah, super young. And I'm interested in Baylor and Dariana Orem coming back.
Right.
Baylor losing Riley Crandall and Aaliyah Binford. You thought that Baylor was going to be this team with a very deep pitching staff. Riley Crandall, the way that she pitched in that super regional against Florida was super impressive. Aaliyah Binford, another pitcher that had a win against Oklahoma and is like crafty, change up, a great addition to any staff. Like you thought Baylor was going to have this deep staff, and instead they're looking light. Plus Dariana Orem, who is very talented. We know that about her, but missed last year with an injury. How is she going to come back, and how will she handle what seems like she's going to be taking on a lot of innings for Baylor? She's very talented.
It's tricky, though, because I talked to Glenn Moore about that, and he's like, he wants her healthy by Big 12 play and beyond. So they might kind of be careful with her early in the pre-conference and depend on more of a baseball by committee approach, which we're seeing more and more now in the sport. I'm sure your box scores are now real thrilled. You're going to have to fill out more box scores, but they got Lily Walker from Duke. They may go by committee just to keep her innings down, to keep her healthy. I think that, and you're seeing that some of that strategy across the country, but I think you're going to see that in Waco with Baylor.
Yeah, and that Lily Walker changeup, I mean, it's a sight to behold. You got to see her pitch this changeup that she has from Duke. I will always remember her throwing that. Like, I feel like she threw it like 5 or 6 times in a row last year, but it is so good.
That is really good. Of course, the storyline, Big 12, Oklahoma and Texas now in the SEC. It is real. We've talked about this coming. Well, it's here. A young Oklahoma team for Patty Gasso, who, by the way, as we record this, late Monday afternoon, is now the new U.S. national head coach and will be the head coach of the Olympic team for the U.S. national team come 2028, which I think was fitting considering the Olympics, while it is in Los Angeles, the softball event will be held in Oklahoma City. So who else would you have there? So that's going to be unique for her. But I got a sense in talking to Coach Gasso, I'm not surprised that she was going to be involved in that, but necessarily she's excited about this young group and, quote, coaching them again. She kind of said with a veteran team, you sometimes have to stay away, stay out of their way because they know what they're doing. With the young team, you're developing and coaching them. So she seems excited, but it's going to be interesting. Who's the next big stars from Oklahoma will be interesting, and how they handle the SEC landscape.
Yeah, I mean, bringing up Oklahoma just makes me think about how a theme of this year is really the unknown and who's going to be the breakout stars. There's not just going to be one. We know that there's too many new players who are going to have bigger roles this year, and or, freshmen who are just new faces. But the breakout stars, the breakout teams, who are they going to be? Because with that senior class graduating for Oklahoma, I can't help but think that every team in the country is relieved that finally that amazing senior class from Oklahoma graduated. All they did was win 4 national championships. And it just feels like maybe, just maybe, the door is more open than ever. And that's not to say that Oklahoma's not going to be talented. We know at this point they always are. And you said that Patty Gasso is excited to coach again. That's because she's a great coach. She loves to coach, and it shows with how her players perform and have this mindset and grow all throughout the year and come together in the postseason. So it, to me, still though, that yes, they're going to be good and they are Oklahoma, but the door to me is wide open for a lot of these teams that have new faces, whether it be big freshman classes or big transfer classes or a new head coach. Just so much newness in our sport, so many changes that is incredibly difficult to keep up with. But in about 2 months, or even like I would say after the first month of the season, we're really going to know who these new stars are and have a good heartbeat on the teams outside of Oklahoma, Texas, Florida that maybe are at the bottom of the top 25 right now in rankings, or outside of it that might have a real shot at winning this thing and coming together. And of course, Oklahoma's always going to have a shot. Several new transfers and some new arms there, but of course, they're going to be talented, but they're going to be pushed in the SEC in a completely different way than what they faced in the Big 12.
Yeah, and she told me she might looks like a pitching by committee approach early on. As she quote told me, there's no Kalani Ricketts on this pitching staff. Doesn't mean they're not talented, but again, she's like, hey, teams have done this to us, so now we're going to do this to them, where they throw a bunch of arms on them there in the wrong offense. They do have Ella Parker and Cassidy Pickering back, who she said kind of carried them in the postseason. If people forget, they kind of were the hot hitters over the veterans there. So they're leaning on them, part of the 8 returners. You mentioned Texas comes with them. They returned the core of that team. It was announced by Texas officially on Monday that Vivian Martinez is out for the year with an injury. We hope for the best for her, a speedy recovery. She'll be hopefully back next year. But still, despite that, Mike White has got an incredible core back and is one of the few teams in the country that probably is one of the most, as he's called it, a senior laden team with all the talent coming back. They're set up pretty well, and we've kind of forgot how young they were last year.
Yeah, there's not very many teams where they're starting out in the top 10 or the top 25 in rankings, and you kind of know exactly what you're going to get from them for the most part. Like, there's not a lot of those teams, but Texas is one of them. Just lost to Still Check, and they lost Alyssa Washington and Bella Dayton. All 3 of those players were big leaders, like I feel like emotional leaders for their teams in different aspects, in the outfield, on the infield, and then in the pitching circle too. So I think just the question for them will be who's stepping up as a leader, because when I look at Check, Washington, and Dayton, they were those emotional leaders for them, and who's going to step up in a different way. But they get their entire pitching staff back. And really, Mike White had kind of been like Kenny Gajewski at Oklahoma State with a lot of new transfer portal additions. That's not their case this year. They have some freshmen that have come in, but truly this is going to be like the Texas team like we saw last year, just a year older and wiser. Of course, led the way with Reese Atwood and Mia Scott, with how dynamic that those 2 players offensively are in completely different ways. But Tegan Cavan, how will she be as a sophomore? I think that she's going to be like NiJaree Canady in a sense, where she's getting a lot of attention, a lot of expectations for her. Some people saying preseason, big SEC pitcher of the year for her. So what does that look like for her? How is she developed? But love watching her pitch last year, and truly talented. And I think that she could be the one that leads the way for Texas this year in the circle.
Tremendous. I talked to her and Reese Atwood, and I think they're ready for that challenge and taking that next step. Oh, have you talked to Reese about her dog?
No.
You're a big dog. You're like you and Alex Powers are 2 people that I know are the biggest dog lovers.
Yeah,
she has
true.
a big dog who made a cameo on the show, which you're going to have to bring this up. When you do a Texas game this year, you have to bring this up to Reese Atwood, and she can show you photos. Trust me, it's a big. And then Tegan Cavan, like her family's driving when they go to Missouri and bring her dogs. Like, this is a big deal.
Dogs are a big deal, Eric, for sure.
All right, so there's your notes. When you do Texas, bring that up to them because they talked about it as well. Texas will open SEC. They're going to be playing at Florida this year. Man, woo! Some SEC matchups this year is going to be wild. Just look at the Florida home slate to start. Florida's hosting Texas, Arkansas, Alabama, and finish with Oklahoma.
Yeah.
Hello, that is script.
Yeah.
But I know Tim is excited. Talking to Tim Walton, he's excited about this group. They've added another talented freshman class to go with the class from last year. They were so close, right there, one win away, one some would say maybe an inning or two away from playing for the national championship. High expectations in Gainesville.
Yeah, definitely. And Texas and Florida both, didn't lose these huge senior classes like we're talking about with a lot of other teams. So they were young, they get to build on it, play together. I mean, they lost Skylar Wallace, which of course is a huge loss, and Kistler and Wilkie, but they added, some depth on the infield, a little depth in the circle with the transfer, and then also a freshman that Tim Walton is speaking highly about, and Caitlin Oxley, who they call Red, or Big Red, I think. She's got some big red hair. And I know that he liked the fall that she had. So being able to back up Keegan Rothrock and Ava Brown and add her, as well as the transfer from UNC Wilmington, I think that this team, that from the offense that they put up last year with both their speed and power, they're going to be a threat there. But being able to have somebody back up Keegan Rothrock, because really in the postseason, it was all her. She pitched her heart out, had an amazing freshman season, but she needed some help. And so she's going to get that this year. And I think that Florida looks like a real contender with Corby Otis coming back, Jocelyn Erickson and Kendra Falvey, kind of that core three, and then adding Riley Holtor from Washington, and then of course Kenley Cahalan from Alabama. You got some transfers there who come from proven programs that have been battle tested in their respective conferences. And Florida maybe got better, even though they lost Skylar Wallace.
Florida's got a lot of attention. Texas getting a lot of attention. Texas was the preseason pick in the SEC. Oklahoma, it's pretty much been the consensus top three, not just in the SEC, but in the polls, in the preseason polls, wherever you look. Who's a team that's kind of under the radar in the SEC? I know you're very good over the years at picking a team in the SEC that might surprise, and hey, they might jump and make a leap here and get in the top. Who's a team in the SEC that's not maybe getting the buzz that you think maybe, hey, don't be surprised if they crash the party of those and be right near the top at the SEC at the end?
Well, I thought you were just going to lead me right to Texas A&M after you talked about the top three in the SEC, because Texas A&M, I think, could make a lot of noise. And they graduated a lot of offense, a lot of home run production. But I think that how Trisha Ford put things together by using the transfer portal and pulling some people in both in the circle and offensively, I think A&M is going to be really good. And the only question mark for them, of course, naturally, is just going to be their offense, because they lost so much. So are they going to be able to generate some home run powers and RBI, or home run power and RBIs? Since they lost Jazz Hill and Rylan Wiggins and some others that I'm not even thinking of right now, because I'm too busy thinking about this season and the new players, especially Sydney Peters coming from Washington and Grace Sparks coming from Ole Miss. Those are two absolute huge additions for A&M to be able to help out Emily Canady. In my non-biased opinion, I think that Emily Canady should be the number one overall pick in the AUSL college draft whenever that happens, because she's this lefty, throws 70. Nobody does in AUSL right now and in the college game what Emily Canady does. She grew a ton last year, had to throw a lot, kind of like Keegan Rothrock at Florida, like the ball was going to go to her undoubtedly. And now she too gets help behind her with Sydney Peters from Washington and Grace Sparks to give some different looks, and some freshman pitchers as well. They have a deep pitching staff. So A&M, added a lot of key pieces, and I think that A&M could build off of that great year that they had last year when they didn't have necessarily a deep pitching staff and they just rode Emily Kennedy's arm the whole time.
What a perfect Aggie, too. Like, I spoke to her on the pod here, and I mean, she learned from Megan Gibson. She wears the number because of Megan Gibson, your former teammate. Although she says that you're her favorite, though, Aggie, not Megan. There, but
I'll take it.
Yeah, you like that. But what makes her so great? Because you're right. I mean, and part of this, when you're in the SEC, sometimes you get maybe overlooked a little bit. But we saw what she did last year. But you look at it, we're gonna have Tegan Cavan in the SEC guy, Keegan Rothrock in the SEC, Carlin Pickens, the reigning SEC Pitcher of the Year, Burzon at LSU. I mean, we could go on and on. Might be a stack, but she should be in that conversation, doesn't she?
Yeah, absolutely. And it's the fact that she's left-handed and literally throws 70-72. So, she's worked to develop her game over the course of the past 4 years, and Trisha Ford has worked with her just to add a little something for the past 2 years that Coach Ford has been there. And this year will be no different. I mean, needs to work on her off speed a little bit more to complement that 70-72. And I think that she did that in the offseason, or at least I hope that she did that in the offseason, or I should say, I hope it transfers into games, because I know that she worked on it. So, I mean, nobody really does what she does. Like her height, her power, and then her coming from the left-hand side, it's just so different than, a Tegan Cavan and Keegan Rothrock, who are, spinning and be rise ball, and they're both right-handed. But Emily, just nobody's really like her. And that's why, I mean, if I was a guessing girl here, I would think that she would be the number one overall pick to the Volts in the AUSL draft.
You called that super regional at Texas A&M, which I think a lot of people regard as maybe the most exciting, dramatic super regional of all time in the sport. You've called a few exciting ones. I don't know. Have you had time to reflect on that super regional? Because I mean, I remember I texted you, and a lot of people kind of agreed with me, and I've said this on the podcast multiple times since. I thought you and Kevin Brown was phenomenal in that broadcast and added a lot to that series. Maybe the best broadcast we can imagine softball. Like if you showed somebody, hey, how do you broadcast a softball game? Just show them that game. You lived in it. You've had time to reflect on it. What do you think about? Because I asked both. I mean, even Mike Wyatt and Trisha Ford still talk about it to this day. They get brought up all the time.
Well, thank you for saying that. We had an absolute blast. Our entire crew did, and getting to do that super regional in Austin. I mean, we literally had a dog and cowboy riding a longhorn that was happening behind the outfield wall. Remember, we had trash coming out of the outfield wall. Like, that super regional had just about everything, including like monumental home runs and outs and moments and bench players. And it was absolutely epic. I need to go back and watch it and find some time at night, like before I go to sleep, and put that in, because it was a rivalry and Oklahoma City on the line, and two teams that were just throwing blows back and forth. And the underdog was looking like it was going to win. A&M was looking like it was going to upset the number one seed. They had them on the ropes, but then Texas, found a way to win in those final innings, and came through. But I'm just sitting here thinking about all those moments of just how back and forth it was, kind of reliving it. And it was truly just absolutely epic. That was just so fun to watch and be a part of.
Do you remember leaving the booth feeling like, wow, that was pretty awesome? Like, did you and Kevin Brown even talk about it? Because like I said, that's a memorable super regional. And I thought, like I said, I thought you two were phenomenal. And just, I'll never, even your producer and director, I got to give him credit, because I remember there was that part where Tegan Cavan's trying to get out of a jam. Kat Osterman's in attendance, and you're going back and forth showing Kat, showing Tegan Cavan the future. I thought the narrating was just incredible stuff. It's goosebumps stuff.
My God, I'm getting goosebumps just thinking about it again. I need to go back and watch it. But yeah, Kevin and I definitely talk about that. He'll remember that one forever. I think actually he was going back and watching either clips of it or watching the game even last week. He texted me. So definitely one I'll remember forever, and not just because A&M is my alma mater, but just because it was just a classic, an instant classic when you left there. And it was just one of those series, Eric, where it's just unfortunate there had to be a winner. Like, I know that Texas fans wouldn't say that, and they're just going to say, oh, it's because, Amanda's an Aggie, she's saying that. But there are these series and games where they're just so well played and back and forth, and both teams had their moments, and you just hate that there has to be a loser, that somebody ends up not being able to come through. And it was A&M this year, and you have to imagine, or it was A&M last year, you have to imagine though this year that's just going to fuel their fire, that they had that experience with such a core part of their team to be able to use that this year to try to take that next step to make it to the Women's College World Series, which they haven't been at in a few years.
Yeah, I mean, that series was the example. We always, as broadcasters, always say we want good games, right? You root for good game, exciting games.
Yes.
That's the example right there. That's the blueprint.
Yeah, that's all we expect is a super regional type feel for every game, right? Starting out on Thursday this week. That's all we want is just epic super regional feel games every time, right, Eric? We don't, the blowouts are overrated. We need good games, 1 run, 2 run games, back and forth every game. And that is, as a broadcaster, you don't care who wins and loses. You just want good games. And so is that too much to ask to have that for every game?
I don't think so. Not with those two programs. Of course, those two are now SEC rivals again. That's going to be unique to see them play once they do get to play in SEC games and things like that. And at least they won't get paired up in regionals. Maybe they could get paired up in supers. Who knows down the road? But you're right. A&M, they could live. That's going to be a fuel for them. And talking to them from that finish line there, that they were that close to getting back to Oklahoma City.
Well, and that's one thing that I think fans forget about a lot too is that these bigger conferences now with so many teams, like you don't play everybody. So your SEC schedule, who you match up with, really matters. Yes, the win-loss column, like you have to win, period. But like all these teams play different teams. It's not one even schedule where you're going to play everybody. So for all of these conferences now, you just have to keep that in mind that it's not always an apples to apples type schedule. Sometimes you get a quote unquote, I mean, SEC is strong top to bottom, but sometimes you get a quote unquote easier schedule in some years than other years. So just always keep that in mind that everybody's playing different teams. And I'm going to be a big proponent of pushing for those rivalry matchups to be played every year. There is zero reason that A&M and Texas should not be playing every year. I think that each team should have two rivals that they are going to play every single year. Like for A&M, it would likely be Texas and LSU. For Oklahoma, it would be Texas and whoever else. There should be these two rival opponents that you play every year. The fans would love it. The schools love it. You just look forward to it. Like it just creates that consistency. And I think that it's something, especially in the SEC, that you just need to have.
So you would go the football basketball model where you're guaranteed to play certain teams every year.
I would love that. I think we need it. I know I want it. A huge proponent for it. It's something that I'm definitely going to be pushing for behind the scenes and trying to talk to as many people as I can about it, because I think that the super regional of Texas and A&M was a prime example. If we can get that feel for sure, like 2 times a year for every team, why would you not want to recreate that? I mean, the feel of a Texas A&M versus Ole Miss or Missouri is not the same as a Texas versus Texas A&M, as a Oklahoma versus Texas. Like as it stands right now, there are years that Texas and Oklahoma won't be playing each other, and that to me just shouldn't happen.
I kind of agree. I feel like it should be doable, I guess, to do that. I know some people might say, well, that's going to create an imbalanced schedule, but you already have that.
You already have that. Yeah. It'd be one thing if like it was going to do that, but you're already having that. So give the fans what they want with these rivals. And even like Florida, Georgia is such a great rivalry. Florida and Alabama, has become one, being at the top of the SEC for so many years. So I think that we need it.
A lot of conversation this year. Will the SEC get everybody in the field? We're seeing what they're doing in men's basketball. It's historic. They're on track to perhaps get 12 to 13 bids in basketball. They're like, whoa, that's a lot. Softball's gotten 13 last year. I mean, what do you envision here from the SEC standpoint? We might have a lot of competition for hosting and things. I mean, it's kind of turning towards the South a little bit from the sport, that standpoint.
Yeah, I think they get 90% of the teams in, maybe with an exception of one team. And I can't even point out who that's going to be. It seems too good to be true or too hard, I should say, to get in all of the teams. Even like a South Carolina with their new head coach and Ashley Chastain and bringing over several of her players from Charlotte. Like, I feel like that's going to pick up South Carolina to just possibly be better. They're, I think, picked to finish last, but I don't know who's going to finish last. And, you kind of feel like, the teams are going to be up top, but I don't know who's going to be that team that's bringing in the rear, because I feel like all of them at the bottom have made some changes that have been strong changes, even like an Ole Miss with her revamping her coaching staff and getting a lot of transfers in. I mean, Aaron Earlywine and Nancy Evans being added to that Ole Miss staff. Like, who thought in the offseason that was going to happen? But now here we are. Aaron Earlywine is back in the mix, and Nancy Evans, who was at, Arizona, had an amazing career there and has coached several, many talented pitchers, is a huge add for Ole Miss to bring their coaching staff to develop their players. That they got several transfers in the portal.
The middle of the pack of the SEC. I mean, I can't even separate them. LSU, of course, brings back Cindy Burzon. They like their pitching staff. Have a lot of replace some offense. Pleasant's graduating. Briggs graduating. Georgia, who I'm going to get to see this weekend, is super young. The Jada Kearneys and the Kumas have graduated. They lost, they graduated Kerpix as well. They do have Lily Backus back. Arkansas, they're excited about the freshman class they've got coming in. Ella McDowell's a name to remember there in Arkansas. I mean, the middle of the pack's going to be even just as fascinating in the SEC. I hope you know your tiebreakers rules, Amanda, because you might need that later in the figure out seeding for the SEC tournament.
No kidding. And the way that everything is changing with NIL rules and roster rules and transfer rules, I can barely keep up. Like, I'm just going to have to learn as I go here. Missouri, though, I liked Missouri last year. They lost some players, but they getting Taylor Ebbs from Kentucky was a big pickup for them, and return a lot of their pitching staff with Sierra Harrison, who had such a good year, and Marissa McCann and Taylor Pinnell. So I feel like this Missouri team, I feel like this is going to be a strong Missouri team. Marcy Anderson always does a great job with them.
I also have made a New Year's resolution this year, Amanda. No matter what happens during this regular season, I'm just not going to count Alabama out. That's it. They're just, right? There's no point. Doesn't matter how good they look or they don't look so good. Patrick Murphy, they seem to always figure it out by the time they get to regionals and super. That's what's been the story.
Every single time. I was shocked to see that they were in the coaches poll pick to finish 10th. And it's not because I had really, made my own coaches poll or poll for who I thought was going to go where. It was just weird to see Alabama picked to finish 10th in the SEC, because you're used to seeing them up at the top, but you don't ever know. I know that Coach Murphy really likes his speed on his team, which, at some points Alabama had gone away from a little bit, but I feel like in the past couple of years, they've just gotten faster and faster. And I think that how Alabama does will ride a lot on Jocelyn Brisky, and going from being a freshman to now a sophomore. Caleb Beaver was so dynamic and fun to watch in the 1 year that you saw her at Alabama. What a career for her. But now she'll pass the torch to Jocelyn Brisky, and how will she take being that ace, stepping into that ace role? She had great stuff, really calm, cool, and collected in the circle, but another one of those pitchers that adds depth to the list of pitchers that we were just mentioning, Eric, in the SEC.
It's unbelievable. We could do the arms. And, oh, by the way, Carlin Pickens in Tennessee. They're going to be they are the two-time defending regular season SEC champs, as Coach Weekly would remind us.
Yeah, and they're one of the teams that lost a good bit, right? With Peyton Gottschall and Kiki Malloy and Riley West and Zaina Pooney and Koutsianopoulos. I mean, this is one of the teams that was highly affected by a big senior exit. So, of course, they got Craig Snyder coming from Texas Tech. That kind of started the dominoes, right, for everything that happened, because Craig Snyder went to Tennessee. Jerry Glasgow takes over at Tech. NiJaree goes to Texas Tech. That was really the first domino to fall there. I guess you could even say it was Chris Malvo going to Auburn, right? That started the movement there. So one thing kind of led to another. But I think, too, with Carlin Pickens, they lost Peyton Gottschall, but Sage Margetko, who came from South Carolina, had really great stuff last year. So adding her to the pitching staff, who is very different from Carlin Pickens, you could potentially be looking at maybe one of the contenders for best 1-2 punch, I feel like, with Carlin Pickens and Sage.
Is it crazy to say that you could make a case that there's 8 to 10 teams in the SEC that could get to Oklahoma City? Not necessarily win it, but just get there. How many teams would you put as far as, hey, I would not be surprised if this team got to Oklahoma City from the SEC?
Oh, it's so hard to feel the excitement and not want to join you in the 10, but I would say realistically, just looking quick, maybe I'd give it a 6 or a 7. Realistically,
that's a lot. That's still a lot.
That for sure. I mean, they have 15 teams now. So half of the teams in the conference have a chance to make it there, right? Or you project, you see them as talented teams. Yeah, they're just so deep. And Jayla Lassiter going to LSU. I'm interested to see how that plays out. I mean, LSU has just such a deep history of center fielders, right?
Yes.
You had AJ Andrews, and Aaliyah Andrews, and then Sierra Briggs. And now you add Jayla Lassiter to that list. LSU is synonymous now with Golden Glove center fielders and just athletes who are going to make some star plays. So interested to see, her wearing an LSU uniform. And there's one more. Oh, and then Georgia, you mentioned them. I mean, another huge senior class that graduated. And what's Georgia going to look like now without all those household names that we knew them, we loved them. They were just there with Tony as he took over the reins from Lou Harris Champer, a huge part of their program. And now it's going to be all new faces, but you know that they're going to be just as talented. Tony Baldwin is such a great coach, and his staff. So I'm really interested to see what Georgia looks like this year.
Yeah, very young team, but Tony's excited about the freshman class he's got, that they'll step in and play offensively there with Dallas Goodnight and company there. And of course, Lily Backus, another arm. I mean, that could be the year of the arms here, Amanda. Could be the year of the arms. We could be heading back to that.
I hope so. I'm always, in Clearwater last year, we had so many home runs and runs scored. I think we're all scarred for the rest of the year from the offense. If you remember that, the ball was just flying out of the ballpark and the games were like 3 hours long. So I'll take a year of the pitcher. And, so many pitchers too, Eric. And this is what I'm excited about. I mean, we can sit here and talk about all these names that we know and all these pitchers that we know, but I fully believe it is the year of the unknown. There are going to be so many pitchers, hitters, defenders step up who we're going to really get to know this year because they've either been on the bench or haven't even been in the college game yet because of these deep senior classes that were 4 or 5 year starters. And now we're going to get to see a lot of new faces. And that to me is just so exciting for a sport. Kind of like it's like you hit refresh on your browser. Like that's what I feel like we did with the college season is hit refresh. And now everything is kind of repopulating and we're getting to know all these fresh faces.
I think when you bring up the year of the unknown, I think the Big Ten comes to mind with their new look. You got UCLA, Oregon, Washington joining the Big Ten. Jordy Ball back. Remember, she got hurt last year at the Port of Vallarta. We barely saw her. It was a couple deal. We haven't seen her since. How does she look at Nebraska there? So I think that's kind of the uniqueness of the Big Ten. Northwestern's young as well, but really just to see how UCLA, Oregon, and Washington fit in to that Big Ten picture is fascinating. And then you got the Jordy Ball factor.
Yeah, the Big Ten is really a lot of fun. We were talking about this before the show. I feel like Oregon and Washington and UCLA. Did I see? That's a whole other thing. It's like we hit refresh on all the conferences. Those three schools are all in the Big Ten, right?
Yep.
Like that's yeah. Yeah. So I know that you had just said it, but it still just is so weird to say and get used to. And I'm going to be reminded throughout the entire season. But I just feel like that new blood in the Big Ten with some really talented programs and coaching staffs makes it very interesting. And the Big Ten was this conference that to me was already back on the rise with what Indiana was doing and Penn State in the year that they had last year and Northwestern with what they had just continued to do, as well as, Michigan, like Lauren Durkowski. Like I feel like and Jordy Ball adding to Nebraska, like the Big Ten has like been on the rise for the past couple of years. And so when you add UCLA and Oregon and Washington, this new blood in the mix, it's only going to make the Big Ten even better and push those other teams that were already on the rise to what I think going to be a new level. But UCLA, I think, is the projected winner, I would say, right now with just how much talent that they have coming back and a deep pitching staff. But there are, the other teams in the mix like Indiana and Northwestern and Bridget Nemeth at Penn State, who had a breakout year last year. Like it should just be a lot of fun to watch. Some great pitchers and pitching over in the Big Ten. And I think
UCLA's arms is impressive too. Tinsley and Terry, and they got the Fisher, the freshman. I mean, my goodness.
Adding Addison Fisher will be huge. I mean, Caitlin Terry was super impressive. Taylor Tinsley, like those two handled the adversity that UCLA faced in terms of just not having a lot of depth in the circle. They handled it beautifully. And now you add the freshman and Addison Fisher's, I think the number one recruit in the nation as a freshman, like a lot of attention on her. So adding her arm with the experience that Tinsley and Terry got, I mean, that UCLA team, maybe their strength is going to be their pitching staff. Who knows? And I will say too, I'm can't wait to watch Jordy Ball pitch again. I feel like in the past year, you've really seen her on social media and press conferences, like kind of come out of her shell. Like I feel like we've seen her grow up in this year that she didn't get to play, grow up in another way. And it almost seems like she's, stepping into being a bigger leader. Transferring, I didn't transfer, but I would assume that transferring is never easy to just go to a new program, especially when you have all the accolades and attention like Jordy Ball got coming from Oklahoma. But I feel like this past year, maybe she used it when she was injured. And I would assume to see the game in a new light, like you take that step back. It was such a whirlwind at Oklahoma for 2 years with 2 national championships and all the attention that you get being a part of that program. But you take a step back, seeing her like just love, it seems like she's loving her life and her dogs and being around her family. Like, to me, it just seems like she's in a really good place, despite probably going through one of the hardest things that she's ever gone through with this injury that happened at the beginning of last year. So, kind of push the pause button, right, on softball. And I kind of see her as being a bigger leader. And how is she going to come back? We know she's a hard worker. What does her as a two-way player look like? But Rhonda Revelle in Nebraska really retooled that Nebraska team to add some depth and talent around Jordy Ball and the rest of their team.
Yeah, I agree. It's going to be fascinating. Rhonda Revelle has mentioned when she talked to me about how, in a way, it was kind of a blessing in disguise that she could just sit back, take a deep breath, and watch the game a little bit. But with that being said, now she gets back in the circle. And as you know this as well, there's a mental side of this when you come back from an injury like she has. How long does it take to get over that? Is it the first game or two? Like, how do you bounce back after missing time with an injury?
Yeah, it's hard and you have to give yourself grace and ease into it. And mentally, you want to be at the place that you were before you got hurt, even though that time has passed. Like that's just what you expect of yourself. So I feel like Rhonda Revelle is the best person and Lori Sipple and their coaching staff. They're so good at having that patience and giving their players grace and communicating. Like I feel like she's in such a good spot to be able to rebound and kind of ease back into things this season. I'm excited for her. I feel like she's just one of the stars of our game. And she's electric to watch, similar to NiJaree Canady. And look at the transfer additions that Rhonda Revelle added around her. Ava Cusack from Washington, she was a great player, excuse me, from Wisconsin. She was a great player for them. The Camazin twins from Arkansas, one's a pitcher, one's a hitter. Catcher Olivia DiNardo from Arizona, Casey Hoffman also from Arkansas, and then Kylie McGee from Arizona State. So added some depth in the circle with some talent. There's a lot of talented transfer additions to Nebraska to add to their roster. It's impressive.
Yeah, it's going to be interesting. Nebraska, Texas Tech, who has the better year of the two? That I think that's going to be some constant comparisons there. With Jordy
Definitely.
and NiJaree there to follow. Michigan, by the way, is a team to watch. Their offense took it to a different level under Amanda Chittister as the hitting coach. Erickson's a talented hitter. They got Durkowski in the circle. Very experienced team. They host UCLA. Just, watch out for Michigan. That's my sleeper pick there.
Yeah, I think and Lauren Durkowski is really good. Again, the pitching to me in the Big Ten is what stands out the most. You have a lot of big named pitchers in the Big Ten that I think are going to kind of lead the way. And I'm excited to see how it all pans out. And I think that you're absolutely right that Michigan offense got better as the year went on under Amanda Chittister's tutelage.
ACC. It is no longer just Florida State and everybody else. You got Florida State, Duke, who broke through, got to the World Series. Talking to associate head coach Taylor White, that was a big deal to them to break through and get to the World Series and say, hey, we're in this picture too. They're actually the preseason favorites over Florida State, according to the coaches. You got Stanford and Cal into the ACC, which sounds weird, but that's where we're at. Stanford, of course, they have the question mark of life after NiJaree with Jessica Allister and company. What's your thoughts on the ACC 2025 edition?
I think that there's the most unknown in the ACC and the mid majors than anywhere else for some reason. I think because so many people who graduated and the newness of Cal and Stanford coming in and what does Cal look like when they're not in the Pac-10 anymore, but there was it Pac, oh my God, it's just so hard to keep everything straight.
Pac-12.
But when they're not yet Pac-12 anymore, but they're over in the ACC, like there's just to me a lot of unknown specifically in the ACC. I mean, Duke lost so many key players, ACC Player of the Year with Claire Davidson. Kelly Torres was a huge asset for them back behind the plate. Giselle Tapia, Jayla Wright, like, and then Lily Walker, we talked about transferring to Baylor. Like, they lost a good amount of players, but they have a good amount of returners coming back who we've grown to know and love, with Amina Vega and Deanna Jennings and Anna Gold. I mean, a lot of like familiar faces. So I love watching Cassidy Curd pitch, though, despite losing Jayla Wright. I think that Cassidy Curd, when she is on and commanding her pitches, is one of the best pitchers in the country. Lefty, spinny, competitive, ball gets on you. Like, I love watching her pitch. And I think that Duke could be right there at the top again with Florida State. With Florida State, I'm really interested to see their pitching stuff. You know, like, what is that going to look like? Return a lot, but a lot last year of freshmen figuring it out, McKenna Reed battling injuries. Like, I feel like there's a lot of unknown, but a lot of really big potential with their pitching staff that is fairly deep.
It is strange to talk about Florida State and questioning what do they have in the pitching and how it looks. Their offense looks loaded with Beecham and Torres, and they're excited about that. I know, talking to Lonnie Alameda this week on the episode that came out, but still obviously managing McKenna Reed and her health. That's going to be a key wild card. I will point this out to you. It is an odd year. Florida State tends to do pretty well in odd years. They played for the national championship in 2021 and 2023. So
Yeah, it's funny how that works out, isn't it?
yeah.
And Ashton Danley was who I was thinking of, the freshman that last year got some really big experience. I love watching Janai Kerr play personally, and then Michaela Edenfield back behind the plate with this deep pitching staff that they have. They added a freshman in Jazzy Francic, who was, I saw her pitch in an all-star game this past summer, who was really good. And I think really just got to add a lot to their staff. Oh, and Julia Apsel too. I mean, that to me is kind of a hidden gem that was in the transfer portal. That was a big pickup. So Florida State added some pieces despite losing some key players, with, of course, Kaylee Harding and Devin Flaherty and Mudge. I mean, oh my goodness, like, what's Florida State without Harding, Flaherty, and Mudge? We're going to find out. It's just going to be a different team, but that deep pitching staff, I think Lonnie Alameda is going to figure that staff out this year. And the only thing is, hopefully they're healthy and can all complement each other the way that she's done so well of building a bullpen and having these rotations throughout every game.
Clemson begins life without Valerie Cagle. Virginia broke through, made the tournament last year. You got Virginia Tech, Pete Demore and company with McMillan, and they could be the sleeper pick there in the ACC there. Then we'll see. With the middle of the pack for the ACC is very interesting. Who steps up in the middle of the pack and challenges, and how Stanford and Cal complements the league. I know, talking to the coaches in the ACC, what they're excited about is they feel that Cal and Stanford bring depth, extra depth to the ACC, and they feel, that's going to be one of the other storylines. We know the SEC is going to be the number one conference in the sport. Who's number two? I think will be fascinating debate all year.
Yeah, you mentioned that Virginia team. They're a team that's been on the rise for several years now, and they're going to be a more veteran team too, with the way that Ian Bigham pitched in the regional last year, shut down, I think it was Ohio State a couple of times. She's back. And this team is experienced and has been on the rise. And if you haven't been, usually I feel like my sleeper pick is in the SEC, like you talked about, Eric, but there's just so many teams and so much to sort through there on. And I feel like the ACC is similar, but Virginia is kind of my sleeper pick in the ACC. I like what they've quietly been doing. I love their stadium, and give me a pitcher like Eden Bigham, who can shut down an offense like Ohio State any day. And what kind of year is she going to have as she tries to lead them maybe into a super regional, fighting for one?
Got to the regional final last year, referring to the Knoxville, because they shut down that Miami offense of Spade and Golubitsky.
That's it. Yeah, I'm sorry.
Well, you're thinking Karen Kumar. Karen Kumar, the head coach of Miami, Ohio, is now at Ohio State. That's what you're thinking there.
So many. I was thinking the right state. Sorry, we go through so many teams and players on this call. It's a lot to keep straight, but absolutely. I mean, major props to Miami, Ohio. I want to give them all their credit for the offense that they put up, but that's last year, but that's the offense that she shut down 2 times. And I mean, that is hard to do with the amount of home runs that team hit. Whew. Not easy at all. I can't wait to watch Ian Bigham pitch in Clearwater. Hopefully, I have Virginia a few times. I think hopefully I get to watch her throw in person.
That's right. They'll be in Clearwater. That's it. I'm thinking, wait, what do you mean? What's she talking about when she's going to see him? Then I realized, oh wait, you're talking Clearwater. So you're going to be there all week in Clearwater, part of a loaded field, and you're going to see maybe some of the best mid-major teams there: Liberty, Wichita State. And I think that's the interesting question. Me and Justin McLeod are going to preview all the other 27 conferences in the mid majors. And I think the big question we have is, with these power conferences growing, Amanda, is there enough room still for mid majors to make an impact in the NCAA tournament? Certainly no Pac 12, so that takes away an automatic bid. So there's some spots there. But you wonder, can the mid majors, especially from an at large standpoint, come Selection Sunday, still get enough bids there? They had 5 a couple years ago, 3 this year. Trust me, as a bracketologist, I'm scrambling ahead. But that's going to be interesting to see, like, one of the top teams there. You might see arguably 2 of the best mid majors. If we did a poll, would be probably Wichita State, Liberty.
Yeah, they will be going into the year for sure. And, I feel like the mid majors have had this traction since Odyssey's performance when JMU made it to the World Series in 2021. And she became such a breakout star. And specifically with the mid majors, I just find it so fascinating, all the changes from head coaching changes to ace pitchers leaving. I think of like a Jessica Mullins, who we'd all watched for so many years, and her lead the way at Texas State. Cameron Meyer at Omaha, who had such an amazing regional. That was in Columbia, right? Like, she was a breakout star. Wichita State did lose a lot, and they're going to look a little different. We're used to seeing Wichita State have more power, but Christy Breadbenner acts like they're going to have a little bit more speed. So what do they look like without some of their key players who've just recently graduated? But Liberty of the mix seems to be the most consistent, bringing in, what they did last year into this year. And if you remember, I mean, Liberty was like outs away from making it to a super regional, which would have been a historic moment for their program. And Omaha was as well in that, right? So Liberty returns a lot. I know Dot Richardson is excited about their consistency that they're bringing from last year into this year. And then, yeah, I there's so many that we could talk about with San Diego State, and then also Grand Canyon, McNeese, BU. What does Louisiana look like without Jerry Glasgow, who had
Allison Habits, yeah, back home there. Louisiana's the head coach.
Yeah. So a lot of changeover in mid majors. And I do hope, like the discussion that you and Justin were having, I do hope that they can keep this prowess about them and keep the momentum going that we've seen the past few years, even despite all these changes. I mean, Olivia Lackey graduating from South Alabama, who had beat Alabama several times in her career. Like, there are some, noisemaker pitchers and coaches who had made a lot of noise in their programs for the past 4 or 5 years, who are not going to be with us this upcoming year. And it just feels odd.
Sunbelt took a hit, losing Lackey, losing Mullen, Sam Landry transferring to Oklahoma. It's a young league. Could open the door for like Lauren Laporte and JMU. They got a lot back in the Sunbelt Conference there. Then FAU, I'll throw out there, Jordan Clark, disciple of Courtney Dyfel, got to the tournament last year, won the American. May have the best pitching staff in the American this year. That's a team to watch there in the state of Florida that keeps growing. You mentioned Boston, Casey Ricard. So there's talent there across. And like you said, I like you. I'm going to give you credit all year. The year of the unknown, which could present a lot of upsets early in the year. We may have to be patient this year as far as not overreacting to early results as a result, right? Because of the unknown.
I think that's such a good point. Yeah, there's just a lot of unknown. And I think it's like the coaches are going to try to be figuring out too. They're going to be trying a lot of different players at different positions. Yes. So it's a bit of unknown for them too, as they try to see who is the best piece as middle infielders, as our outfielders working side by side, what pitchers are complementing each other the best. Like, because we feel all the unknown, the coaches are feeling it too. They know that there's a lot of unknown and inexperience on their team. So in terms of having patience, they're going to need to have patience. We're going to need to have patience and see these coaches. We're really going to get a chance to watch coaches develop their teams throughout this season. And I think that's such a cool part of it, of those senior classes graduating, and you kind of knew what you're going to expect out of a lot of these teams. But now, with the unknown, you don't know. And we're going to get to see a lot of coaches coach up their players and develop their players and see how these teams really come together at the end.
Do you feel we may have more candidates this year to get to Oklahoma City than ever before because of that?
I absolutely think that. And I think that when we sit here and talk about the unknown now, I think that that unknown is going to continue into regionals and super regionals. And I think that things are going to get a little bit crazy in the postseason. That's another prediction there too. That's not too wild or like crazy and specific, but I just think it's going to lead to a really wild postseason.
Do you have a team that might be like the Duke that kind of makes that breaks through and gets to a World Series? Do you have a team, or are you still you're still trying to figure out that part of that there? Because I know you're getting ready for
Yeah.
Clearwater, but I'm curious if, because you're usually pretty dead on too and picking teams that, hey, don't be surprised if this team ends up in Oklahoma City. I think you had Duke last year, as a matter of fact.
I think I did too. But in all fairness, I think I had had Duke for the past couple of years, so I just stuck with them, and they eventually were going to
Sometimes
be
that's
able.
the smartest thing to do. Just stay with it.
I liked I mean, Arizona has all the history, right? But I liked how you talked about them as being a possible candidate to get
Yeah.
to the Women's College World Series, as much as a school with tradition and history like Arizona can be kind of a sleeper candidate. Like I just think with what they've been through the past few years, like some turnovers and or turnover and changes, and I could see them getting back. And I mean, what about, how many Big Ten schools potentially could make it? Like Oregon, we didn't really talk about them. Like, could this finally be a year that Oregon is able to break through with Missy Lombardi and a deep pitching staff that they have there, and some good athletes, maybe gain some confidence in conference play that leads them into the postseason feeling really good about themselves? So maybe that's another team. And I mean, as much as Nebraska can be an underdog with Jordy Ball in the circle, I mean, with what Ronda Revelle has put together with their complete team to be around Jordy Ball, like maybe Nebraska makes it back.
Yeah, I think it's wide open from that side. I think we're gonna. There's a lot of possibilities for Oklahoma City, to say the least. There, and it'll get going. Obviously, you get going. Clearwater. Once again, Shriners tournament, big field there. What are you looking forward to? You got 12 games. Knock on wood. Mother Nature, please cooperate with us. But you're scheduled with 12 games. You and Matt Schumacher there. What are you looking forward to seeing early in Clearwater?
I'm looking forward, Eric, to surviving the tournament. That is going to be my ultimate goal. But let's see. I think I have all five of San Diego State's games. So having seen Stacey Newman as the new head coach of the Bandits and the AUSL, like I've never really gotten to call San Diego State's games. So there are some like newer teams that I don't get to see all the time that have been making some noise, like San Diego State, like Charlotte, like Wichita State, that I'm looking forward to getting a chance to call some new teams that I haven't had a chance to call. There's only three teams that I'm not going to have: Clemson, Auburn, and one other. I'm looking forward to seeing the noise that A&M makes early in the season. And makes at the Clearwater tournament, and there's some good matchups too, like Alabama and I think UCLA play. UCLA, Oklahoma State. Like there's some top tier matchups. And two, we were talking about Missouri. What does Missouri look like at the Clearwater Invite? Like let's see the kind of noise that they make early in the season too. I think that that's a team to watch out for.
Man, now I feel like a jerk. I was telling Amanda off the air, man, I'm prepping for 6 teams in one weekend. She's got to prep for like 13 teams like at once. I feel like a jerk now. I apologize. Now I'm like, what am I complaining about? You're preparing for twice as many teams as I am.
Oh my gosh.
What are
It's
we
a lot.
doing? What are we
But
doing? What are you and I doing?
it's a great cram session between like doing this with you and looking at the full landscape of the entire college season going into it and then prepping for Clearwater. Like it's the best kind of like get it done. Don't wait until the end of season or March. Like get it done now early. It's great because it sets you up for the entire rest of the season and you get a good feel with where everybody is at.
Well, as one of our listeners like was asking me when you're coming on, put it best, the season doesn't officially start until Amanda Scarborough's voice is heard. It has been heard here, ladies and gentlemen. Once again, here on In the Circle and D1 Softball. Sincere thank you. Like I said, I know you've been super swamped with so many things you're doing, so many awesome things you're doing in the sport. The athletes, the limited draft, things you're doing with the pitching angel, which I'm excited that it's growing and growing every year. So I do not take this for granted that you take the time to talk to little old me, but more importantly, our audience. Can't wait to see you in Clearwater. We'll see if we cross paths. If one of us still has a voice by then, we'll see. That could be
Yes.
50-50. But hey, seriously, thanks for doing this. Look forward to seeing you in Clearwater.
Yeah, looking forward to it. And let's have a great season. I just want to have a great season and continue to build in this sport that continues to grow so much. Let's keep building. Let's do it.